Mr. and Mrs. Nambi prided themselves on being hardworking and successful. Mr. Nambi, a long-haul truck driver, spent days, even weeks, on the road transporting goods across the country. Mrs. Nambi owned a thriving fabric shop in the heart of the bustling city market, working from dawn until dusk. They believed they were building a stable future for their only child, Amarachi. Yet, in their pursuit of success, they failed to see the cracks forming in their family. Amarachi, a lively and curious 14-year-old, spent most of her days alone. The routine was the same every morning. Her parents would leave a wad of cash on the dining table with a short note. Amarachi, buy your breakfast before school. Lunch money is included. See you later, the note would read. By the time Amarachi woke up, her parents were already gone. Breakfast was a hurried affair from a street vendor outside her school gate. Lunch came from any nearby buka her friends recommended. Dinner? Whatever she could find on her way home. Her parents thought the money they left was enough to show their care, but Amarachi craved something they weren't giving time. As the years passed, Amarachi's eating habits spiraled. She never questioned the hygiene of the food vendors or the quality of what she ate. Her favorites were greasy fried snacks, sugary drinks, and spicy dishes from roadside joints. To her, the convenience outweighed any concerns. Though Amarachi enjoyed the taste of these meals, they came at a cost. She often felt lethargic after eating, struggled with stomach cramps, and was frequently bloated. But she shrugged it off, thinking it was normal. At school, her teachers began noticing changes in her behavior. Once a vibrant and focused student, Amarachi now looked tired and struggled to keep up in class. Her friends would tease her about how often she complained of stomach pain, but none of them realized how serious her condition was becoming. Her parents, oblivious to the situation, were too busy with work to notice the warning signs. One hot afternoon, during a long mathematics lesson, Amarachi felt a sharp pain in her stomach. Sweat beaded on her forehead as her vision blurred. "Are you okay?" her friend Chioma whispered, noticing Amarachi clutching her stomach. Amarachi tried to nod, but couldn't muster the strength to respond. Moments later, her body gave out, and she collapsed onto her desk. Chaos erupted in the classroom. The teacher called for help, and within minutes, Amarachi was rushed to the school infirmary. The school principal immediately contacted Mr. and Mrs. Namdi. "Your daughter has collapsed," the principal said gravely. "She's being taken to the hospital. You need to come immediately." The call jolted both parents out of their workday routines. Mrs. Nambi dropped everything at her shop and raced to the hospital. Mr. Nambi, who was on a delivery trip nearby, diverted his route to be there. When they arrived, they found Amarachi unconscious in a hospital bed, hooked up to an IV. A doctor was waiting to speak with them. "Your daughter's condition is serious," the doctor began. "Her body is fighting off a severe bacterial infection caused by prolonged exposure to contaminated food. Her immune system is weak, and she's malnourished despite her young age." Mrs. Namdi gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Malnourished? How is that possible? We've always provided for her." The doctor's expression softened, but his words were firm. Leaving money for her to buy food isn't the same as providing nutritious meals. Amarachi's diet has been far from balanced, and her stomach is now filled with harmful bacteria. If she hadn't been brought in today, the outcome could have been much worse. The words hit Mr. Nambi like a freight truck. He slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. "How would they let things get this bad? We'll need to keep her here for at least 2 months, the doctor continued. "Her body needs time to heal, and we'll monitor her closely to prevent further complications." When Amarachi finally woke up a day later, her parents were by her side, their faces lined with guilt and worry. "My baby," her mother whispered, stroking her hair. "How did this happen? Where have you been eating?" Amarachi hesitated. She had never thought about her food choices as a problem. "Just from the places around school and home," she murmured weakly. "Can you tell us exactly where?" her father asked gently. She listed a few familiar names, including a restaurant she frequently visited after school. Hearing this, Mr. and Mrs. Namdi decided to investigate. The next day, they went to one of the restaurants Amarachi mentioned. From the outside, it looked decent. Nothing fancy, but clean enough. However, when they demanded to see the kitchen, the truth was revealed. Dirty plates were stacked everywhere, and raw meat sat uncovered, swarmed by flies. The cooking staff wore stained aprons, and rats scurried along the grimy floors. The head cook, a disheveled woman with greasy hair, stirred a pot of soup with a spoon she had just used to scratch her arm. The stench was unbearable. The visit to the restaurant left Mr. and Mrs. Namby seething with anger and disgust. The sight of the unsanitary kitchen replayed in their minds as they stood outside, trying to gather themselves. How could they let something like this happen? Mrs. Namby exclaimed, her voice trembling with rage. My child nearly died because of their filth. Without hesitation, they stormed back into the restaurant and demanded to see the manager. The manager, a thin man in a wrinkled shirt, approached them with a forced smile. Good afternoon, sir, madam. How may I help you? Mrs. Namby didn't hold back. How dare you serve food from that? That pit you call a kitchen? She shouted. Do you have any idea what you've done? My daughter is lying in a hospital bed because of your negligence. The manager's smile faltered. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. Mr. Namby stepped forward, his face a mask of cold fury. We've seen your kitchen, he said firmly. The filth, the rats, the flies, it's a miracle anyone walks out of here alive. My daughter is fighting for her life because of the bacteria in the food you serve. The manager began mumbling excuses. We've been short-staffed, and there's been some maintenance issues. Maintenance issues? Mrs. Namby interjected, her voice rising. That's what you're calling rats running across your floor? You think that excuse is raw meat sitting out in the open, or dirty spoons being used to stir soup? You're poisoning people, and you don't even care. The few customers still in the restaurant were now staring, murmuring amongst themselves. Embarrassed, the manager tried to de-escalate. Please, let's not cause a scene. We'll handle it. You'll handle it all right, Mr. Namby cut in. We're reporting this to the health authorities. The next day, inspectors from the city's health department arrived at the restaurant. After a thorough inspection, they declared it unfit for operation and shut it down immediately. As the Namdis left the scene, a heavy silence hung between them. Their anger toward the restaurant was now eclipsed by guilt. We've been so busy chasing money, Mr. Namby finally said, his voice low. We thought we were doing right by her, but we've failed as parents. Mrs. Namby nodded, her tears flowing freely. She's our only child, and we've been blind to what she really needed us. All this work, all this money, what would it mean if we lost her? They drove back to the hospital determined to change, vowing to never let work overshadow their family again. During Amarachi's recovery, the Namby family underwent a transformation. The time spent by her hospital bed became a period of reflection for her parents. They had always believed their hard work was for Amarachi's future, yet their absence had put her life at risk. Once she was discharged and back home, the changes were immediate. Mrs. Namby began closing her shop earlier, and Mr. Namby cut back on long-haul trips. Their once empty home now felt alive with the warmth of family meals and shared moments. The first evening Amarachi returned home, her mother insisted on preparing her favorite meal, jollof rice with fried plantains and grilled fish. The aroma filled the house, and for the first time in years, they all sat at the table together. How does it taste, my dear? Mrs. Namby asked anxiously. Amarachi smiled through a mouthful of food. Perfect, Mama. It's better than anything I've ever bought outside. That night marked the beginning of a new tradition. Mrs. Namby took it upon herself to teach Amarachi how to cook. The lessons weren't always smooth. Amarachi once burned a pot of rice so badly they had to throw the pot away. But the laughter and bonding made every mistake worthwhile. Cooking takes practice, my girl, her mother said, patting her shoulder. But you're learning, and that's what matters. Even Mr. Namby joined in occasionally, sharing stories of his childhood and his mother's recipes. The family grew closer than ever, rediscovering the joy of being together. Amarachi's health continued to improve. She looked healthier, felt stronger, and was more vibrant than ever. At school, her teachers noticed a remarkable difference in her energy and focus. The Namdis didn't just stop at cooking meals together. They began spending time doing other activities as a family. They went on weekend outings, played board games, and spent evenings talking about their day. The once quiet house was now filled with laughter, the clatter of pots and pans, and the comforting smell of home-cooked meals. One evening, as they sat down to eat a steaming pot of a goosey soup with pounded yam, Amarachi looked up at her parents, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you, Mama. Thank you, Papa," she said softly. Her father reached across the table to hold her hand. "No, Amarachi. Thank you," he said. "You reminded us of what truly matters. All the money in the world means nothing if we lose the ones we love." Her mother nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "From now on, we'll never let work come before our family." The bond they rebuilt became unbreakable, and Amarachi thrived in the love and care of her parents. Their story served as a reminder to everyone they knew that love, time, and togetherness are the true wealth of any family.